Debt. How they purchased our silence and subservience. Each of us innately knows that debt should be avoided whenever possible. Many of us have lived within our means and played by the rules, hoping for a chance to give our children a better life than we had. Thomas Jefferson knew that government debt was not only bad economic policy, but also morally unacceptable because it effectively makes your children responsible to pay for what you bought. He said, "The principle of spending money to be paid by posterity under the name of funding is but swindling futurity on a large scale." As if that wasn't clear enough, he also said that politicians should consider themselves unauthorized to saddle posterity with our debts and morally bound to pay them ourselves. By spurning his counsel, our politicians have damned our dreams. They have effectively branded our children as future slaves to our creditors, and they have placed our country in a position of servitude to the rest of the world. If we try to escape those obligations through self-serving economic policies, we will be the ones held responsible. When we place ourselves in debt, we have no one to blame but ourselves. And the same holds true for our country. Yes, it was the elected officials who forced us into economic servitude. But didn't we elect them to office and then keep electing them term after term after term, even after the magnitude of their gross incompetence became clear? Yes, it was our politicians who negotiated and approved the pork and the spending. But aren't we the ones who sat idly by while they did it? Our interest payment on the service of our $11 trillion in debt now stands at about $26 billion per month. That's over $300 billion a year that will likely be sent overseas to our creditors instead of being used to upgrade our schools, our roads, or our national defense. Common sense tells us this is unsustainable. A country that cannot educate or secure its population is a country that just isn't going to be around much longer. One of the tricks that our leaders have successfully played on us is the illusion of numbers. If I asked you to send me a check for $4,000, you'd probably think about what you could buy with that money. An amazing vacation, maybe new furniture or braces for your child. And then you'd wonder why on earth you'd send it to me. But when our government asks us for the $26 billion every month, we don't have the same reaction because it doesn't feel personal. Well, let me make it personal. With one monthly $26 billion interest payment, we could fully fund the annual budgets of the Centers for Disease Control, the Coast Guard, and the Department of the Interior. With our annual $300 billion in interest payments, we could fully fund the Department of Commerce, Education, Homeland Security, Housing and Urban Development, Energy, Justice, and Labor for an entire year. By 2019, annual interest payments on the national debt will balloon to a projected $806 billion. Why? Because, as you might know from your own credit cards, interest compounds quickly. Making only the minimum payments will result in the unpaid interest being added to our outstanding debt. It is a cycle that is almost impossible to pull out of, and the damage to our country will almost certainly be irreversible. That $806 billion in interest is more than what it cost us last year to fund the entire Department of Defense, Veterans Affairs, the Department of Transportation, and the State Department combined. Where will all of that money come from? Again, the politicians will say, the rich, or maybe greedy corporations. But if that's our plan, then we're set up for dramatic failure. The total 2008 profits of ExxonMobil, $45.2 billion, General Electric, $17.41 billion, the evil Walmart, $12.7 billion, and IBM, $12.3 billion, totaled $87.61 billion. If we tax those profits at 100%, we still wouldn't even have 1/3 of the amount needed to pay the annual interest payment, let alone any of the principal. So, what about the wealthy? Well, let's look at it this way. If we took all the personal income tax revenue from every American taxpayer for the next decade, you would still not have enough money to pay off the national debt, even if you exclude interest. And as a side benefit, we'd have $0 to fund the actual government over those years. This is modern-day slavery. But instead of being sold to work in the fields, our children will be working 100-hour weeks at their jobs to pay off the debts we've amassed. Common sense shouts that if this were happening in your home, you'd have to stop spending immediately. So what is Washington doing? The exact opposite, of course. They're spending more. President Obama announced that his 2009 budget was projected to produce a $1.7 trillion deficit. If you break that down, you'd find we're spending $4.657 billion every day for a year, which breaks down further to $53,906.64 per second. In the time it has taken you to listen to these few sentences, our government will have spent more than what most Americans make in more than 20 years of work. Borrowed money has to be paid back, but it won't be us who will have to do it. Our children will question our sanity for spending money we didn't have on bridges to nowhere, skateboard parks, tattoo removal, and other pork-laden projects that politicians stuffed into must-pass legislation. They will wonder why we tolerated such reckless behavior from our elected officials instead of holding them accountable. So how will we respond?